Hi, it's Andy from PCR Global with another one of our videos from our A to Z of Risk Management playlist. These videos are short enough not to induce boredom, but important enough to keep at the front of our minds and on the tips of our tongues as we stand on the front line of safety. Something different with this video, it isn't that short. It's about 1 hour long, but it's a very important subject. And also, if you wish to get a CPD certificate for this video, then go over to our PCR e-learning academy, whereby you can sign in, you can watch this video, and you can ask some questions. There will be additional information in there as well. And if you get 100% in the questions, then you will get a certificate. So, today's letter is F and the subject is FMEA, Failure Modes and Effects Analysis. So, here we go, Failure Modes and Effects Analysis. The first things first, let's have a quick look on the internet. What does it say? So, if we type in Failure Modes and Effects Analysis, FMEA, and put HSE with it, then we will get the HSE website. It doesn't give any guidance on how to do them, but it does actually provide a review of methods for demonstrating redundancies. This is using FMEA. It's a long read, probably no need to read it really, but that's about as far as we're going to get on that. A wider search onto the internet for FMEA, we're obviously going to get our Wikipedia. We're going to get a lot of quality organisations talking about FMEA. If you go onto YouTube, you're going to get a lot of videos on there as well, all of varying sort of benefits. But it's certainly a well-used and quite an old method. So let's start. What are we going to cover in this micro session? Well, we're going to cover what is FMEA and what is FMECA. That's Failure Modes, Effects and Criticality Analysis. When, where FMEA can be utilised. And then we'll also have a look at how FMEA fits into the wider risk management that goes on. So we look at a little bit of the inputs, the actual FMEA itself, and then what I'm more focused on is the outputs, because that is so important, not just to focus on working on an FMEA worksheet. So the history of FMEA. By all accounts, started in the 1940s from the US military. What is it? It is a systematic procedure for the analysis of a system to identify the potential failure, the potential causes, and the effects on system performance. If we also add on to that the C, the criticality, and that's when we get into the severity and looking at the detection as well. It's a common process analysis tool. So how common is it really? Well, if we dive out of this and we go into sort of my Kindle library, let's have a look. So the fundamentals of risk management, is it mentioned in there, FMEA? It's mentioned in a few times if we do a search for it. So we'll do a quick search for FMEA. FMEA. This is the Fundamentals of Risk Management book. It accompanies the course, the form course. You don't get it if you do the course. The book is far more in depth than what that course actually delivers. But yeah, it certainly mentions on a number of occasions in here about FMEA. So we know it's mentioned there. So it is well used. If we go into David Hoyle's book on ISO 9001, it's also going to mention it quite a lot, a few times in here about FMEA. It talks down the bottom here, after the designing process, a way of detecting design weaknesses that has been used successfully in many industries is the FMEA. So it's mentioned. That is an outstanding book, by the way. Protection of assets manuals, no, it's not in there. Let's get my face out of the way. This is one of the books that I've got for my Masters, my MSc in Strategic Quality Management. And under one of the quality tools in here, there's quite a lot written in here on FMEA. Just flying through these cause and effect diagrams, check sheets. Again, an excellent book. Past histograms, and then we will come to FMEA. I'm sure it's in here. Give me a quick second. And here we have it. FMEA, so it talks about what it is, it talks about, we're going to cover that anyway, but as we can see there's quite a lot mentioned in there, so we'll jump out of that book, and it's also featured in a number of the other books, so it is a really well used quality risk management tool. Okay, moving on. FMEA and Risk Assessments. We mentioned before that the Health and Safety at Work Act, it's a primary piece of legislation. It sits right at the top. Then inside that filing cabinet, we have all the approved codes of practices where needed. We have the regulations, of course. We have health and safety guidance, and we have the industry guidance. It's criminal law. We can get prosecuted. So looking on the left-hand side there, we have a number of the regulations that I've mentioned before, especially in the dynamic risk assessment bite-sized piece that we done. A lot of those require risk assessment. It does not say they require an FMEA. An FMEA is a method of doing it. What's good about an FMEA, I find, it actually takes you through the step-by-steps of the process. We do that in health and safety anyway when we do task analysis, but it is a good method, and it can be used. Obviously, there's so much specificity, so much specialism required if we're doing a vibration risk assessment, a noise risk assessment, the manual handling risk assessment, and there's lots of guidance out there for doing those. So I wouldn't be doing FMEAs for those. Just to reiterate, it is the primary piece of health and safety at work legislation that sets out the responsibilities of employers and employees as well as others, and it also gives powers to the health and safety executive to enforce the health and safety regulations. Okay, back to what is an FMECA. This is adding the C in now. Failure modes, effects and criticality analysis. This is an extension which includes the means of ranking of the severity of the failure modes to allow prioritization of countermeasures. Anytime we do a risk assessment, the output, why are we even doing it for? We're looking for hazards. Potentially we're looking for opportunities as well if we're thinking more ERM, enterprise risk management. But when we're doing a risk assessment, we want some type of prioritized list. We're going to talk quite a lot about that when we have a look at the actual FMEA worksheet we're going to be working with. But it is all about that prioritization. You need to know where you are going to spend your time, spend your money. What is the biggest risks? And again, this could be opportunities. But we need to prioritize it. Otherwise, we're going to focus our time in the wrong areas. Combines the severity and frequency of occurrence to produce a metric called criticality. That's where the C comes into this. So, a little bit more about them. A thorough FMEA or FMECA is a result of a team effort. So we want a team that should be composed of individuals who are competent to recognise and assess the magnitude and consequences of various types of potential inadequacies in the product design or in the system that might lead to failures. The word competence there, the health and safety executive, we're looking at skills, knowledge, ability, training, experience. What's not in there is the Q, which is qualifications. I'm quite a qualified individual, but it does not mean I'm competent. I'm certainly qualified. I got the badges on the wall. It does not mean I'm competent. I like to think I've got some competence in there somewhere. I get out on the ground. I get myself involved with people. And I'm also the head of risk for PCR Global. So I have to do these components on a day-to-day basis myself. Competence. Make sure you've got the right people in that FMEA, FMECA risk workshop. The advantage of the teamwork is that it stimulates the thought processes and best ensures necessary expertise. We can't guarantee that it's all going to work, but if we've got people together, if we're doing that important thinking, then it's going to give us the best chance. If we were to purchase the standard currently, which is under review, then we're going to be looking at, if you remember, £137. I currently don't have this new standard, so I suppose I'm actually now going to ask Andrew Collins if he'll purchase this for me. I've got the old standard, 2006 standard, and interestingly, in the names of the standards, we now have FMECA actually is listed in the name on the front of the standard. Some common language, all important, very important to have definitions and an understanding of various languages. And I don't just mean in terms of the nationality of language. This is certain speak. If you operate in a security environment, there will be certain speak. If you're ex-military, certain speak. Quality, environmental, health and safety, HR, they all have their own language. Language can be a barrier. Very important to ensure you have a good understanding of that language. When I was working in Iraq in early 2005, 6, 7, working in multinational teams, very important when we were traveling up and down the roads, and we had to give over the radios, we had to give certain commands, so all 3, 4, 5 vehicles had the same information in one word. So when you do have different nationalities, you have to hammer that out to make sure everybody is singing off the same hymn sheet. And it's the same for FMEA. So some of the language, we've got failure mode, failure effect, effects analysis. We'll go through this in a little bit more detail. Failure mode analysis, the design FMEA, a process FMEA, and also risk assessment factors. What's not mentioned there is criticality analysis, which I mentioned earlier on, which we will cover. Failure mode. So when we talk about a failure mode, this is just the way something may fail. For example, if it's a car tire, might fail by a puncture from a sharp object, but there might be a blowout. So there are only two methods of failure modes. The failure effect as an output, the failure's consequence in terms of operation, function, or status of the item. Again, it's going to be dependent on the situation that we're talking about. But there's mode, failure effect. Analysis. Studying the consequence of the failure modes to determine their severity. Analysis. I really do want to get a point across. I missed the importance of this word for years. When I was just doing the 5 steps to risk assessment, the HSE guidance risk assessment, you would go through it. Analysis. Analyze. That word in itself, it means breaking things down into their component parts. The beauty of ISO 31000 risk management guidelines is that the risk management process within there talks about the risk assessment process being risk identification, risk analysis, and then risk evaluation. So analysing something is breaking it down. Identifying it is realising it's there. If we haven't identified it, we can't analyse it, which is why it's so important when we put these risk teams together to do FMEAs or whatever we're doing. It is very important that these people are able to identify the issue. This is why if you're bringing a consultant in and he's doing your risk assessments for you, sat at home behind his nice desk, he's not even analysing what's going on. He might have a lot of knowledge on risk assessments, but ultimately the people who do the job, the guys and girls on the ground who have the boots on the ground, the tyres on the tarmac, these are the guys who will know the nuances that goes on within the jobs, within the tasks. And if we think about the known knowns that we talk about a lot more in sort of crisis management, we think about known knowns. We get the unknown knowns. These are things that the guys on the ground know, but senior management, top management, and certainly a consultant who sits outside of the organisation, they're not going to know. So it really is important. Analysis. So a blowout is likely to have most serious consequence. A puncture usually allows pressure to decrease gradually, allowing time to sense the problem before loss of control. So look at the two differences there. By analysis, we can work that out. Failure mode analysis, basically what I've just mentioned there, an analytical technique. It's an analytical technique used to evaluate failure modes with the intent to eliminate the failure mode in future operations. We also have a design FMEA. So we have a design and a process FMEA. Realistically, you could put any word you want in front of it. Leading up, you could have a business risk FMEA realistically. A design FMEA, it's an FMEA applied during the design phase of a product or a service to ensure that potential failure modes have been addressed before you actually commission that process or that project. The process FMEA, we just got to know the difference between design and process really. FMEA applied to a process, as in a factory or office, to ensure that potential failure modes of the process have been addressed. So if we're doing design FMEA before, if we're doing a process FMEA during. So we can do this FMEA at any time. This for me is absolutely important, and this will, critical I should say, and this will come more into being when we talk about the actual worksheet. Risk assessment factors. I've added that terminology there, risk, wrong that word, risk criteria. And I've also highlighted in red there, ISO Guide 73/2009, risk management vocabulary. I find a lot of people have difficulty and don't even realize quite regularly the importance of knowing risk criteria. Actually, we've got to work out the risk criteria, but actually knowing what the whole concept of risk criteria is. Well, it's the terms of reference against which the significance of risk is evaluated. As an output, we would have evaluated something. The word evaluation, we just concentrated then on analysis, evaluation. If you're evaluating something, you have to have some type of baseline, some type of measurement. What is the criteria? That criteria is the terms of reference. So this is when we talk about context. Different organizations have different contexts. So different organizations have different values, different risk appetites themselves. So that significance is going to vary across the board. It's also going to vary within each risk management workshop and each sort of risk component, a component of risk when we're doing our risk on different elements of the organization. It's going to differ. So the criteria can differ because the severity will differ, the impact will differ, and what it means to the organization, more importantly, what it means to the organization, to their values, their vision, their mission, their reputation is all based around risk criteria. So it's very, very important and more often than not overlooked. So when we talk about FMEA and we add the C, we're now looking at the severity. So we're giving ourselves some type of computation. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the issues and problems around severity ranking, due to the fact that it's an ordinal, this is an ordinal scale, I fully get that, and we'll cover that in a little bit. Most people aren't even aware of that, so it's important to show what's on offer before talking about that. So severity. A number from 1 to 10, it hasn't got to be from 1 to 10, it can be from 1 to 5, depending on the severity of the potential failure mode's effect. So the lowest number, no effect. The highest number is maximum severity. So we're getting some type of gauge, some comparison, some criteria. We're going to be looking at the probability of occurrence. Again, 1 to 10, that could be 1 to 5, and this is dependent on the likelihood of the failure mode's occurrence. How often will it occur? 1 is very unlikely to occur. 10 is almost certain to occur. So again, we're setting up that criteria. I'm aware of the issues with doing that. We also look at the probability of detection. So a number from 1 to 10, again, can be 5, depending on how likely or unlikely the fault will be detected by the system responsible. So whether it is the design control process, will it get identified within there? The quality testing, will it get picked up in there? This could be audits, it could be checklists, it could be daily briefings, but we're talking about the probability of detection. Just coming into my head now, when you think about security risk assessments, and we think, and a lot of organizations use a health and safety risk assessment template in a security scenario. You are not going to get the best out of that. Basics. Simple being, when we think of security, this is a different kettle of fish. We now have somebody who's willing to act malevolently. It's not just safety, this is intent. And if somebody's got intent, then they can throw everything else out of the window. So we have to try and measure that intent. So we're looking at the probability of detection, but actually the probability of neutralization as well. So we might be able to detect somebody running towards us with an AK-47 or a long-bladed weapon. Just because we've detected that, because people are screaming, it doesn't mean we're going to be able to neutralize that threat. So now we're looking at the method of operation. We're knowing we've got to try and neutralize that to bring the risk down. So now we're down to what tools and equipment that we have. And it takes us into that whole security issue again of low probability, high impact. So there's so much to think about when we're comparing risk assessment methodologies. Do we have any more on the language? Yes, we do. The risk priority numbers. So we've just got our severity, we've got our occurrence, and we've got our detection. So let's have a look at that. So the RPN, this is the risk priority number. So we've now, looking at our criteria, we're coming up with a number. This number is now going to rank the severity of that risk. Of course, it's not going to be definitive, okay? There's a lot of judgment in this. We talk about qualitative, semi-qualitative and quantitative risk assessments. Very, very rarely is a risk assessment quantitative fully. It's going to have to be a deterministic risk assessment for a start, and you're going to have to know the exact amount of quantities. Most of these are down to judgment, especially when we think about operational risk management, quality risk management. Most of this is judgment based, which is why it's so important that the people in that room have knowledge of the criteria. That criteria as well is laws as well, laws, regulations. So back to RPN. So said another way, severity times probability of occurrence times probability of detection. The RPN will be a number between 1, virtually no risk, and 1,000 extreme risk. Again, that's dependent if we've got a 1 to 10 or a 1 to 5 chart, of course. Put that risk criteria in there again, so important. So again, if we're coming down to if we're looking at it in this method, severity, so 10, 10, 10, okay, severity is 10, the occurrence, the frequency is 10, the detection is 10, and now what that means, that's a low level of detection. We're going to get the highest number possible there. So we want to bring it down as low as we can. If we're using a different size, if we look now at the bottom end of the scale, it's going to be the same here, and we're going to end up now with a low number. This is what we want. We want the lowest numbers possible. So as much as there's faults within ordinal scales, there is a small argument to be made that it does bring us on the page. Severity times occurrence times detection, RPN. If we're using a different scale, then we're going to get, obviously, different numbers. So it's all important to understand the scales. So we've looked a little bit there, we've opened up, we've gone a little bit off tangent, but if you're still watching, I suppose that's fine. Let's get to the all-important FMEA worksheet that we're going to look at. So here's the worksheet. Let's make myself smaller. So why have I put the worksheet so small? For me, it's important. There's a lot to be taken away from this. That worksheet that we're going to look at there is going to take us into that workshop, that time we've spent. We're going to be inside. We're all going to be together making that worksheet. That worksheet there is so far away. There's nothing above it. There's nothing to the side of it. There's something below. We'll have a look at that in a minute. There's nothing to the left of it. That is not how FMEAs work. This is one of the biggest things I want to get from this, is if we look at that FMEA now, if I just switch down the bottom tab, here's the FMEA. Look at all those other things that are going on there. We've got the inputs. What is the input? We've got the FMEA in itself. Within the FMEA, there's so much to talk about. We will talk about it. Then there's the output. There's the output of the output. There's the monitoring of the output. There's the governance of the output. to what standard. So it's so important that we'll go much more in depth and we will use this worksheet. Okay, so it's important for me. It's not that. We have to think about this. This is what really matters. So, okay, let's jump into the worksheet. Put myself back up in the corner out of the way. Okay, so we have a worksheet. We have something leading into the worksheet that, like we just said, we will have a look at that in a moment. So POD, if you remember what that was process or design FMEA. We have a number of columns, and the process that we're briefly going to look at is achieving ISO 45001. Can we do that? Well, yes, we can, because we have a lot of criteria to meet, and we can go through it step by step. And if we start with the clauses and go through the clauses, we will end up knowing, if once we identify the criteria, whether we're meeting that criteria. So, identify the process steps. So, first and foremost, what little note have we got here? Is it possible to do an FMEA for business risks? In effect, if you undertake an FMEA following 9001, then you will be undertaking broad but also targeted risk management. So yes, it is. It is. We can do it on anything because, like I'm saying, there's the component parts. We have to meet those parts. Okay, moving across, quality criteria. I've added that actually in here. If you look on the internet, not all of them have the quality criteria written in. But if you do use a consultant, this is the best part you can get out of them, is they should know what that criteria is. So if we're talking about achieving 45001, and we're looking at 4.1, understand, this is one of the clauses. Let's have a quick look at that clause, because here is the input. Let me make it smaller for you. Okay, so what have we done there? We've taken 4.1, understanding the organisation in its context, from 45001, and that's going into our first step. 4.2, understanding the needs and expectations of workers and other interested parties. Behind every one of these clauses, there's a requirement. There's going to be a criteria. There's going to be a quality criteria. So then we can put that into what is critical to quality. In this case, it is occupational health and safety risk, related internal and external factors and conditions have been identified that could affect or be affected by the organisation's activities. Significant risks and opportunities have been identified. That's what we need to be able to do. So, by using a SWOT and PEST analysis to undertake analysis of internal and external issues, then it does give us evidence. So, we've put the quality criteria behind the input. And we can do this for every one of those. Again, if we come further down, here we have fire risk assessment sort of process. This is the procedure to provide proactive, methodical process of identifying hazards for fire hazards. So we could take any one of these steps and then we could put that into our FMEA and then work through it. So all I'm showing you is two different methods here. Okay, this is a process. Obviously, this is something we're aiming to achieve, but we are designing our management system. And if we design it from 45001 with the intent of passing 45001, then this realistically is what we're going to want to be doing. Okay, so let me get myself smaller and out of your way. So what else do we have here? So we're going to move along. So what is critical to quality? Quality criteria. We just looked at that. Then in the next box we have the potential failure mode. Think about the risk journey, okay? We have the source. That then leads to the event. And then out of the event is a consequence. So that's a good way to think about how these are. Think about failure modes. So potential failure mode. So a SWOT and PEST analysis is not undertaken and recorded by the company. So if I'm now coming in as an auditor, it doesn't say in the standard I want to see a SWOT and I want to see a PEST analysis. But if you do have one and you can evidence that you've been through that process, then you're going to be far more potential of identifying and addressing the risks that you've got, but far more potential of you passing that ISO audit, which is what we're trying to do here. What is the impact? So that's the output of the failure. Non-conformity of ISO, okay, I've put in there, and then I've put leading to a postponement in certification or a requirement to undertake an additional audit, I should have said. There's going to be financial implications. That's not just by the re-audit, but there's going to be obviously in the rework that's required to put this issue right. We're then going to move across onto the severity. So I'm just going to move down here, give ourselves some space. So severity, I've put that as 4. I am currently using a 1 to 5 metric. Okay, so we're looking at severity rating. High rating is the more severe, the occurrence rating, and the detection rating. We'll talk a lot more about this when we come to the end of the talk. But ranking, how can you rank them? So we're back now to that question about ordinal scales. How can we rank them? The biggest thing you have to do for this for me is make sure it is specific to the process, to whatever you're actually assessing. So what have I put here? For me, on the severity of 5, if we didn't do those risk assessments, then ultimately what I'm saying here is you could end up displaying a flagrant disregard for health and safety. You could also be failed to grant certification or a suspension of certification at ISO. So that's what I'm saying is at the high end of it. At the low end, it becomes an opportunity for improvement at the ISO audit. So the ISO auditor is going to say to you, well, hang on, yeah, you haven't failed anything, you haven't got a major, you haven't got a minor, you haven't got an area of concern, or whatever your certification body calls it. You've got an opportunity for improvement. So it's not gonna prevent your certification. The occurrence, I've got 1 to 5 on the occurrence, and the detection, I've got 1 to 5. Again, it is a whole full, very deep lesson surrounding severity ranking using ordinal scales, but we will talk more about that. I just simply wanted to show you where I've got that from. So the next thing we would be wanting to look at is what would cause the failure. So what have I said here? I've got top management not understanding of the ISO requirements. And I've also put 1B, top management not allocated enough resources, people or time. There could be so many causes to this. Again, make sure you don't go in too deep. You have to be stopping at the right time. How do we know the right time? That again is going to be dictated by competence. I've added a note here. How do top management evidence leadership and commitment? Has top management written, endorsed and communicated a risk management policy? Well, if you would have done all of those, then ultimately, when we jump back in and to look at the requirements of the standard, we know we've got policy identified within leadership, working and participation. So by demonstrating that policy, by demonstrating that SWOT and PESTEL analysis, you're ticking off a lot of the other clauses within the standard, leadership and commitment, roles and responsibilities. You're getting people together to do the FMEA. And also under planning, when we're looking at hazard identification and assessment of risks. Okay, actions to address risks and opportunities, objectives and planning to achieve them. These are going to be the outputs of this process. So I think it's useful to have that on the left-hand side there. So the potential causes. And we've got the occurrence. I've given it a 5 rating. Again, I'm not going to bother going back down to it because I've spoken quite a lot about the ratings, but you can see where I'm going here. Severity, occurrence and detection. So I've just put down that there currently are no controls. Why? Because we don't have a SWOT analysis. Why? Because we haven't done we haven't sat down and gone through things. And then we get that risk priority number. This time, because it's a 5 by 5, we're up quite high, of course. highlight that, and that's going to tell us handle with care. Narratives and scenarios, the risk priority number. If we just focus on numbers, we're going to have an issue, because the narrative going into it, the scenario going into it, if it's low probability, high impact, then we're going to end up with the same risk score as something that is high probability and low impact. And if we just focus on RPNs, then we've got an issue. Moving on. So, recommendations. A little bit of annoyance with that coming up. However, what we're looking at here is recommendation corrective action. So what have I put you? 1A, the top management to develop a risk management policy. So as the output of this, we are now going to satisfy the other clauses. In the next column, we've got who. We've put top management. You're going to need to determine who the top management is, of course, and then we just got a date. That's just obviously a fictitious date. This whole thing is fictitious. And then we've got 1B. What else could we do? An ISO awareness program to be developed and rolled out. A lot of the times these ideas sit with consultants, or they sit with your health and safety or risk manager or quality manager, and they don't get rolled out. We need to roll that out. 1C, schedule a risk workshop for pestilence SWOT. 1D, clause 4.1 of ISO shall be made subject to internal audit. So we didn't have it. We're now going to develop it. We then need to check that we actually have it. So that 1D is very, very important. And 1E, the management system shall be subject to a formal management review as per the ISO requirement. So by doing that management review, we're going to satisfy one of the other clauses as well, performance evaluation. But if we just focus on 1D and 1E there, what we're doing, we're putting in those layers of protection, multiple layers of protection, which we'll talk about in a little bit more time. That's the probability of detection. So we're looking back at probability of detection. We don't do those at the minute, so that's why there's not much probability of detection. There's none. Once we do these, we are then going to have probability on potential and even a probability of detection. So what else is written in here in this recommended corrective action plan? So important. Let's have a look. What have I put in there? Logging an FMEA, so recording this FMEA without a robust action plan is fruitless. It's pointless. What happens after the FMEA is critical for risk management. The risk management action plans, RAPs, call them what you want, that is risk management. It's not just risk identification. And then people write the risk assessment, they identify the issues, they then don't put that management action plan in. All of that good work is lost. Separate risk action plans can be provided, of course. Look on the left-hand side there, under the what's, we've got A, B, C, D, and E. Now, the people committing to and the people responsible, the owners for those actions, they want to be working off the same plan. So we should have multiple risk action plans, which allow, as I've written there, for deeper breakdown of the requirements. I'll show you one of those plans as an output of this in a moment. So what else have we got in the comments section? Whilst what has been identified, the important element to ensure that the corrective action is implemented is how. How is it to be done, and how and who will monitor the progress? Again, that's risk management. When we think back to the ISO 31000 risk management process, we have communication and consultation with that, of course, but we also have monitoring and reporting. It can't sit in this plan and sit on somebody's server somewhere. There has to be a strong and robust output. So important. How are we going to do those things that we've identified that requires doing? Okay, what else have we got? A policy sets the intent. So I'm saying that develop the risk management policy. It's an overt, I should have written there, commitment to action. People get consultants to write policies. The policies should be the responsibility of top and senior management. It's fine for them to draft them, really important for senior management to get involved in them. Awareness programs should not be thought of as a pain in the backside that sucks up resources that are critical for both top-down and bottom-up communication. They really are, because you're really getting the information from the guys on the ground. Risk workshops are for winners, of course. Winner, chicken dinner. They really are for winners. And I put in there for professional leaders as well. If you're not factoring in risk workshops, you really do genuinely need to rethink how professional the organisation is. And that's just simple. That's not me being naughty or nasty to anybody. That's fact. Internal audits provide an independent third line of defence, 3-line model. Really important. Again, how much effort do people put on internal audits? Usually handed off to the quality guy, handed off to the safety, environmental, or even sometimes security guy. But they are so important. They're going to feed the top management, feed the board as well with that, and they're going to give them that independent assurance. Management reviews provide assurance that the system is where it should be. Management reviews, a specific requirement of ISO. Management reviews, not just done, they should be done at least annually, okay, but they shouldn't be done just annually. They should be done more regularly than that, and when you have that management review, there needs to be an input from all departments needs to be coming in. The management review on that day should not be that many surprises, really, and there should be an output from the management review. There's going to be loads more action plans from that management review. The output from that management review, we're going to be resetting our objectives. Again, an ISO requirement. We're going to be revisiting our risk assessments, because in that management review, you're going to find out where you are. We're going to plan it, do it, check it, act it, plan it, do it. We're going to go back to the start. Enough said on that one. Okay. I've also put a note on revision date. This is a real interesting one for me. And when the penny drops on what we're going to talk about here now, it's a real good time, a real development on your personal risk management journey. Most of you are probably there. Some of you aren't yet. I don't know. But let's have a look. What do I mean by revision date, and why is that important? We are doing that analysis on that day. The date gives us many important things to think about. Gross or inherent risk, residual and net risk. At what point of time are we judging the element under assessment? As with all risk assessments, we should be thinking, what are we looking at? Are we looking at the gross or inherent risk? That is the risk before controls. Are we then doing other columns of severity where we're looking at the residual or net risk, which is the risk left over? There's 2 talking points there. However, I want to add one to that, because the benefit of showing the gross risk before controls is that when we're showing these controls, the controls take time, they take action, they take people, they take process, they take money. If we took that away, then ultimately we're going to realise all of that gross inherent risk. This is huge for security, because security exists, sort of the absence of freedom. Think of security exists. If nothing is going on, it does not mean that we're not under threat. It does not mean that we're not being watched. It just means that somebody may not want to approach, attack, do whatever it is, because you have that illusion, potentially, that you've got your ducks in a row. So we've got the gross. If we look at, that's going to give us a figure, okay, that's going to give us a judgment. We've got the gross, so we're then looking at the current controls, which bring that gross down. At that time when we do that current controls, this is really the second time we're going to do this equation now. So before, now we're going to do it with the controls, but then we're also going to have other controls that we need to put in. So realistically, we've got 3 areas there that we could be measuring the severity impact of risk. So there's 3 lines. So it's really important to work out at what point in time we are judging the element under assessment. And that will drive the template you're going to use as well. Corrective action. So we've worked through all of this. Now, I haven't put anything in there because I'm just taking it as nothing's been done. But ultimately, if it has been done, then we're hopefully going to have a lowered severity, a higher probability, a lower frequency of occurrence, and then a higher probability of detection. Again, if we're looking to the upside, positive risk, these are going to be the other way around, of course, aren't they? So let's now look at that output. So what have I got in here for an output? What am I saying? Why is this so important? Critical for me now. So we're now going to move on to the output of the FMEA. We've talked a little bit about what the FMEA looks like. This for me is so important. When we come out of that FMEA, we want those all important risk action plans. Here's a risk action plan I'd done some years ago now, but let's have a look at this and think about the current, if you do FMEA or if you do general risk assessment or you do general meetings even, think about the action plans coming out of those. Here we have multiple recommendations, multiple actions. We've got the time scale, we want it done. I've identified the people responsible. We've identified what cost it is going to be. Please don't review this on pause. They're all going to be probably wrong in terms of finances. That's not important. We're looking at the success criteria. This is very important. So the verification, we need to identify what's going to be successful and how we're going to verify it. For this one, senior management set a positive example. The action, senior management to wear PP. Now I remember back in the day when I actually wrote this was because senior management weren't wearing PPE. So the people responsible were the senior management. There was no cost. The success criteria is they actually wear the PPE like they're supposed to. But then we're going to review it in a few months' time with a health and safety manager to see if things are being followed on. This output is so important. You're going to have outputs of this as well. This also gives us that documented evidence for our ISO. It also enables us to articulate and communicate what we want people to do. This is a plan of action. Plans are so important. Now, what's going to come out of that plan? We mentioned earlier on, obviously that plan had nothing to do with what we've just been doing, but it's there just for show. So we mentioned earlier on that we're going to require a risk management policy. So we're back on the page with this one. So here we have the risk management leadership and commitment policy. In ISO 31000, we need to evidence that. In all the ISO standards, we need to evidence leadership and commitment. What are we going to be saying in terms of risk that we're going to be doing for that? Integrate risk management into organisation activities. Issue a statement and procedure establishes our risk management approach, provide the necessary resources, assign authority, responsibility, accountability at appropriate levels, align risk management with our objective, strategy and culture. We have all of these. You can pause this for you to have a look at it, but this is important. Each and every one of those is important. It's going to be signed and we're going to have a review date on it as well. Okay, so that policy, if all of that was in place, then we wouldn't have had the failure mode. Out of that policy, what's going to fall out of the policy? Now we're potentially going to have core values training. This is just taken from one of the companies that I've supported, E.G. Lewis. They have a fantastic initiative which we're developing their 6 core values. We put that training into a wider requirement. But this is what they're doing out of this. They've realised now, obviously this is not for them, this is not for Manning Construction either, but companies would have realised in this hypothetical situation, we needed to do something. This is what some organisations do, and they do it very, very well. So out of that, there's going to be an output again. Here we have training, so everybody's been trained on the 6 core values training. Out of the core values, we're going to have something to evidence that that's been done. This is going to answer the questions in the clauses of the standards. So another output may be, out of that we're going to have a meeting. This is a meeting with Manning Construction. In here we have the managing director and 2 other directors, very important people for this organisation, and we're sitting down and we're going to review. We can see a board in the back here, lots of thought going on, lots of development, but everybody's going through this thought process that we mentioned just now. Whether this is a SWOT, whether this is a PESTLE, whether this is COVID, it doesn't matter. We are going to have to do that. Out of that, we've then come up with another strategy. As part of the strategy, we've come up with another activity that's required. What is this activity? Now we have, again, this is the managing director, taking site managers through what is required. This was identified all the way up in 4.1 that we need to do this. We know at the failure mode that we didn't do it. We have to identify it. What's our detection? What's our prevention? How can we show that we're doing it? And this picture paints 1,000 words. There's time going on here, there's effort going on here, there's consultation, communication, participation, top-down communication, bottom-up communication, and everything is going on. On the board we can see many documents on there that we've been through, a lot of them related to health and safety, quality, environment, of course. Okay, so that's happened. So what about the output of that? This is why it's so important to look at the wider requirement from an FMEA. Out of that, now we've got to get that information onto the ground. How are we going to do that? What's our conduit? Now we're using toolbox talks. It's the toolbox talks, again another output. And when I'm auditing this, if I just jump up here very quick, this is me doing the audit. I am checking that all of this is done at all levels. So, toolbox talks. Out of the toolbox talks. Okay, in here we've got a toolbox talk for ladders. Out of the toolbox talk for ladders, we've got an inspection record. Within here, we're checking everything. Leading into the inspection record, or out to the inspection record, let's have a look. We have, again, a list of toolbox talks. Okay, in here, we're talking abrasive wheels, accident reporting. I know ladders is going to be in here somewhere. There's ladders, yeah, construction, L1V. So that's happening. And then we've got the toolbox talk program. We're going to cover everything. So can you see that this FMEA is a point in time? So much has to come out of it in order to rectify the failure modes that we identified. So what else? So ultimately now, this is Ian, one of our guys. This is Ian, one of our directors, I should say. This is Ian actually now he's verifying that. We've got a red line. Ian is verifying that things are going on. Multi-level approach to managing risk. He's checking that toolbox talks have been completed. He is checking that ladder inspections are being done. He's checking the management program, and he's going to be undertaking a quite an in-depth report when he's on site as well. I'm going to be auditing that if I'm sitting in internal audit. Let's have a quick look through this site report. We could be looking at site security, access control, HSE information, asbestos, welfare, dermatitis, consignment and transfer notes. We're now talking environmental risk management, temporary works, very specific, access and egress, evacuations, construction phase plans. Again, you can pause this and you can have a look, but we're talking office-based documentation and we're talking site-based visualization checks. We're looking at document control, interview, and we're looking at observation. So quite a lot getting written in here. Important, very important. Okay, just going to zoom out so we can see that all important FMEA is now just growing arms and legs as it should. We talk about the internal audit. Why is it highlighted? It is so important. There's the internal audit. Okay, the internal audit is, again, we've said in here we're going to set a framework for audits. Here is the internal audit. The audit process is falling under the governance. It leads back up. It's going to feed back up to top management. Let's have a quick look at the audit process. So here we have a process map. Just waiting for this to catch up. So for myself, audit considerations, whether it's standards, here's the context of the organisation, customer feedback, check requirements. I'm going to prepare the audit program, I'm going to assign audit duties, then potentially the auditor, if it's not myself, I'm going to do a doc review, I'm going to prepare audit checklists. Do they not find any compliances? And then this leads on and on and on to the audit report. But the important thing is all of this gets back to the higher level management. So this is now linked. This is going, what standards are we going to be using? In this case, obviously we're trying to achieve 45,001, but our actual audits, we're going to run our audits by following ISO 19011-2018, the guidelines for auditing management systems. We're then going to come back to the top. Excuse me while this thing catches up. So you can see there that all important audit feeds back in to the approach of the company. The approach of the company in when a company does it really well. What have we got here? We talked about this last week. We talked about the 3 lines model, which was the 3 lines of defense. Okay, and we're looking at those 3 areas. This is where internal audit is sitting. There's a lot of key principles. There is a lot of key roles, okay, when we look at that. So now we're going to zoom back out. So you can see that there is such a lot to think about when doing FMEA. Okay, now I'm just going to finalize here by going to get somebody, because we've talked about all of that. We touched about severity, occurrence, detectability, risk prioritization numbers. We didn't focus too much on ordinal scales, the issues with doing these. So what we're going to do, we're going to go down here, because usually it sits quite a long way away, and I'm going to zoom out to find this, because usually it's quite a fair bit out of the way. So what do we have here? So we have the door. So this is like the door of, we could call it the door of psychological safety. Are we going to go through it? I don't know. I often go through it. What is behind the door? Let's have a quick look. I think this is really important representation, because without what we're going to cover now, a lot of this stuff will never develop to where it should be. We're going to go out and we're going to get the elephant that's in that room. And these elephants are in all rooms, in all organisations. But what we're going to do, we're going to take that elephant and we're going to take it back up where it should belong. It shouldn't belong in a room. It needs to come right in with us when we're doing an FMEA. So what we're actually talking about when we say the elephant in the room? Well, it's a number of things really, but mainly it's to do with the use of scales, the use of severity scales, and the use of RPN, so numbers, the risk priority numbers. It's how accurate these actually are. A lot of people know about this, a lot of people don't know about this. However, there is a lot of references out there that says there's a weakness because they use ordinal scales. I think there's 3 or 4, maybe 4, I think, methods of sort of measurement. When we talk about this type of scale and ordinal scales, which is what this follows, is inaccurate. And where can we look a little bit further into that? If we look at 31010. So if we look at risk management, risk assessment techniques, IEC 31010, 2019. If we look for risk indices, which is indexes, let's have a look through here. It's mentioned in a number of areas. This document does give reference to FMEA and FMECA as well. But what does it actually say about it, which is so important? So here we have a discussion. It's documented with the issues. So risk indices provide a measure of risk which is derived using a scoring approach and ordinal scales. Factors which are believed to influence the magnitude of risk are identified, scored, and combined using an equation that attempts to represent the relationship between them. What we've just looked at there with FMEA is we've looked at the occurrence, we've looked at severity, and we've looked at probability of detection. We had a 5-5-5. Also, we looked at a 10-10-10. So those scales, those equations are used, which gives us a number. However, the problem is mathematical formula cannot be applied to this type of scale. It's really worth knowing this. Reading on a little bit further, risk indices are essentially a qualitative or semi-quantitative approach to rank and compare risks, because that's what we were doing. We're trying to compare them, trying to rank them, so we know which priority to work at them. They can be used for internal and external risks of limited or extended scope. They are often specific to a particular type of risk and are used to compare different situations where the risk occurs. While numbers are used, this is simply to allow for manipulation. And believe me, they can actually be manipulated as well. If we also think of the other issues like centering bias, a lot of people don't want to go to the top end or the bottom end. They want to sit there in the middle. That then can also lead to, if we think about sort of group think, where the strongest person in the group is saying something and then everybody else is just following him. In cases where the underlying model or system is not well known or not able to be represented, it is usually better to use a more overtly qualitative approach, which does not imply a level of accuracy which is impossible using ordinal scales. So it's important. That's the elephant in the room here. We really should know, anybody involved in a risk assessment which has numbers in it, which is done in your workplace like this, they categorically need to know the inaccuracies of it. We should be making them aware of the issues. We should be involving them in the development of the risk criteria. It's very important that the criteria is there. We need to set levels at which we don't want to go beyond. We're talking risk appetite, we're talking risk tolerance and our capacity. We need to set that. It's just how we set it. That is very, very important. Finally, that elephant's out of the room. Finally, just have a very quick look through the flow and then we will finish. So, FMEA, FMECA, select a component of the item to analyse, identify the failure mode. We did cover it, but we're just covering it again. Select the failure mode to analyse, identify immediate effect and the final effect, determine the severity of the final effect, identify potential causes, estimate the frequency or probability of occurrence for the failure mode. Do severity or probability warrant a need for action, yes or no? We're going to be thinking about our mitigation methods. We're going to be documenting what we're doing. Are there more failure modes to analyse? Ultimately, then, we're going to be completing the FMEA. So that's it. We've covered quite a lot there in relation to FMEA. It's very interesting. It is worth doing. Some of the best things from it is it gets us to sit down and go through that process bit by bit. A long piece of CPD. I hope you found it useful. F is for FMEA, Failure Modes and Effect Analysis. So that's it. The knowledge we have and the decisions we make really can help save lives. Today's letter was F and the subject was FMEA. Thanks for watching.